One of the smallest books in the Old Testament is the little book of Jonah. And some may wonder why this book is in the canon of the Old Testament. But as we look at it and study it today, we will find that it contains some very important information. You see, God had a program to take the gospel to the world. And he called on Abraham, known as Abram in the beginning before his name was changed to Abraham, in Genesis chapter 12, 1 to 3, to be the father of a nation that would preserve the knowledge of the true God and then take that knowledge to the whole world. God had promised him the land of Canaan would be the home for his descendants. And God's purpose for that nation was that it would spread the knowledge of the true God to the nations all around, so that they too would become worshippers of the true God. Wonderful promises were made to them. You read in Zechariah 14, 16 to 21, some of those promises were promises of great national blessings, national prowess, strength, and blessings that would come not only to them, but flow on from them to the other nations around the world as well. However, Israel, in a large measure, failed. Instead of taking a knowledge of the true God to the nations around, repeatedly they fell into the worship of idols, similar to the nations around them. And it necessarily led to the punishment of the children of Israel when they were sent into captivity. The northern kingdom first to Assyria, and later Judah, the southern kingdom, into Babylon. There came a time, however, in the history of Israel when it seemed that God really wanted Israel to take up the challenge that God had given them to communicate the truth about the true God to the nations around. So he called to Jonah to make a start and go to Nineveh, which was one of the greatest cities of ancient times, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. In Jonah 1 to 2, we have Jonah being called to go to preach to Nineveh and to warn them that in so many days they would be destroyed. Jonah apparently didn't see that this message was important. Maybe he feared that he would be rejected, maybe even persecuted by the Assyrians. So he ran away, took a boat ticket to go to Tarshish, which commentators say is the ancient land of Spain. However, on the journey, a great storm arose, and the sailors couldn't contain the ship in safety, and they realized that something was wrong, and in their superstition believed that some god or gods was punishing them. And so when they found Jonah asleep down in the bottom of the ship somewhere, they called on him to get up and to call on his God, because they had been calling on their gods and nothing had happened. The storm continued. But Jonah was asked to call on his God. Well, Jonah must have had a conscience that smit him, and he realized that God was not pleased with his default. So he advised them to cast him overboard and the storm would cease. They didn't want to do that. They had a conscience. So they declined his request and rowed harder than ever to try and get the ship under control and to keep it safe, but to no avail. So eventually they threw him overboard and said in a prayer to their gods, "Don't hold this action against us." It was a reluctant action, but God had prepared a great fish, the story tells us, and Jonah was swallowed and spent 3 days or so in the belly of that great fish. Some people call it a whale. Whatever it was, Jonah's life was preserved in there. But after Jonah repenting and praying from the belly of the great fish, the fish vomited him up on the land, and then God appeared to him in a second call and said, "Go to Nineveh and preach." This time Jonah went. And he began to preach in Nineveh. And according to what we read in chapter 3, the people repented. That's an interesting fact. They repented, from the king on the throne to the beggars in the street. They repented, and so God did not destroy them. Jonah had gone out to the city and sitting on the hill nearby, waiting to see the city destroyed. And when it was not destroyed, he was unhappy, because he said, the people will call me a false prophet. What Jonah should have done was to send a message back to Israel to get some help. Call on the sons of the prophets. They're in the school of the prophets, to come and assist him now to teach the people about the true God that had spared them. But instead of doing that, he just got into a state of depression and wanted to die. And God spoke to him about those who had repented. Well, there are some lessons in this story for us. Not just a story to tell to children, but the lessons are, one, God is a God of all people, the true God. He wants the whole world to hear the truth about his character and his plan of salvation to save men from sin. Lesson 2, God chose Israel to be the medium of conveying that message and blessed them, not just because of who they were, but because they had the responsibility to take the knowledge of the true God to the world. If only Jonah had been successful in his evangelistic work and followed up with help from others and taken the message of the true God to other nations as well, what a different history might have unfolded. But they failed to do so. Why was God so concerned about Nineveh at this time? Why was he so concerned about the heathen nations at this time? The urgency of God's concern is illustrated in the way that he finally succeeded in getting Jonah to go and preach. I believe that the answer to that question is that God could foresee the future. He could see what was about to develop in the world. The greatest philosophical and religious revolution in the history of the world was about to begin, and God wanted to get his message in first. We talk about the Great Renaissance, the late Middle Ages, when knowledge increased and the superstitions of many in the Middle Ages was set aside for new knowledge that came to the human family through research and scholarship and study. But this revolution that was about to break, I think, was even greater than the Renaissance that we talk about so much. So what dates do we give to Jonah's mission? Well, according to the commentary, SDA Bible commentary, Jonah's dates are about 860 to 780 BC. Well, if we look at the history of God's people around about this time, we find that there were some great Bible prophets. In fact, there were 4 great prophets that fit in to this period of time, just before the time of Jonah. One is Isaiah. He is called the gospel prophet. Why? Because more than any other Old Testament prophet, he foretold about the coming of Jesus and the work of the Messiah. Then we have Jeremiah. the pre-exile prophet who preached to Judah and tried his best to persuade them to set aside their idolatry and to turn to the worship of the true God. Followed by Ezekiel, who was the prophet of the exile, because he did his work while in captivity in Babylon. And while the book of Ezekiel is not always a book that people turn to frequently, there are some great lessons in that book for us to learn. And then we have Daniel, also a prophet of the exile period, and he is the one who spoke much about the future, right down to the end of world history. And because of that, the book of Daniel is one of the best known books in the Old Testament as far as the Seventh-day Adventist Church is concerned, and coupled with the book of Revelation, which is an expansion of some of the themes of Daniel, we have so much information about end-time events. But now let's look for a moment at the Greek world and the Greek philosophers. Soon after the time of Jonah, a period of great intellectual activity began in Greece. And many of the ideas that the Greek philosophers taught are still with us today and influence Western thought patterns. Many of you would know Pastor Alfred Jorgensen, a scholar and a Bible lecturer for many years at Avondale College, who said on one occasion to his students, and I heard him say it, "There's no new idea under the sun. Any idea that you think is a new idea, if you delve into history, you'll find somebody had that idea before you." He said, "The same old dog, just a new collar around its neck." That was one of his favorite expressions to illustrate what he was saying. First of all, I want to look at some of these Greek philosophers. We take first Thales, 634 to 546. It is claimed that he was the first to leave Marduk out. That means the first one to leave God out of his philosophy. A view that says we don't need God in our understanding. We can compare the modern world of the atheist. He taught everything was once water, and all that was formed by natural processes such as the silting up of the Nile Delta. Anaximander, 610 to 534. He said man was once a fish and crawled out of the water and adapted to living on the land. So Charles Darwin wasn't the first after all to teach evolution. It was way back there in BC dates. Anaximenes, 585 to 524, said that air was or is the main element. And followed by Xenophanes and Pythagoras, we come to Heraclitus, 500 BC. He denied that God had anything to do with creation. He taught the doctrine of becoming. Everything was becoming something new, something else. And we have traces of this in the teaching of Mormonism, a modern religion that says, when talking about God, that what man now is, God once was. And what God now is, man one day will become. Echoes of Heraclitus. You see, I have in my library some of the early books of the Mormon Church. And I've read there that Adam came into the garden with Eve, one of his wives. And after a period of human probation, he then went into the spirit world and became God. And he is our God. Adam is our God, the only God with whom we have to do. That's in black and white in their book. I read it. And it goes back to Heraclitus. Parmenides, approximately 455 BC, stressed pure reason. Knowledge not based on sense experience. We can compare Immanuel Kant, who wrote a famous book called The Critique of Pure Reason, in which he said that there is knowledge in the brain that did not get there through the senses. You see, the pragmatist said that all knowledge comes through the senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. But Kant said there was knowledge in the mind that came there because of the nature of the mind itself. A priori knowledge, they called it. And this was also a teaching of Parmenides, 455 years before the time of Jesus. Anaxagoras, 500 to 428, said mind is responsible for all. Only mind was unmixed with anything else. And we can compare modern Bishop Robinson, Anglican Bishop of England, who said in his book, Honest to God, if you want to find God, look into the recesses of your own consciousness. That's where you find him. Socrates is a Greek philosopher that's very famous, and his dates are 470 to 399. And he taught Plato, who followed in 427 to 347. And Plato, of course, is one of the men who taught the immortality of the soul, a doctrine which is believed by so many Christian people today. Plato organized society in the structure of a hierarchy, with a philosopher king at the top, guardians at a lower level, and then a succession of lower citizens until you came down to slaves at the bottom. We see traces of this today in the structures of many societies. In the Middle Ages, we have the king, and then we have the barons, and the knights, and the peasants structured in society. We see it in the structure of modern armies. The field marshal, the generals, the majors, and the captains and sergeants and privates, the structure from top to bottom. We see it in the Air Force, in the Navy, in their ranks. We see it also in the structures of the Catholic Church, and we have the Pope at the top, the cardinals, the archbishops, the bishops, the priests, the teaching brothers, and then the laity at the bottom. This structure is based on Plato and his teachings of society. And Aristotle further developed Platonic thought. And Aristotle's dates are 384 to 322. In fact, many philosophers today say, we are living today in the Western world in more of a Platonic world than even a Christian world. And as Christianity in recent years has been supplanted or replaced in many people's thinking by other philosophies, many of those philosophies that they have accepted are based on Platonic thinking, Aristotelian thought. All of these men predated the time of Jesus. Now we come to the Eastern world, the Eastern thought leaders. While the Greek world was in intellectual ferment, Asian thought leaders and religious leaders were also engaged in launching new ideas, mainly in religious beliefs. With the exception of Islam and Sikhism, all major non-Christian and non-Jewish religions began soon after the time of Jonah. Or in the case of Hinduism, which began before the time of Jonah, it underwent a very important change just after the time of Jonah. So I'll now expand on that thought with Hinduism. This religion began maybe 1,000 years before Christ, and throughout its history has gone through various changes. It began as a form of nature worship, that is, the god of lightning, the god of thunder, the god of the wind, the god of various forces of nature, which were worshipped. Then it developed into a priestly phase from around about 1000 BC, which lasted to about 800 BC, when priests dominated. Around about that time, it then developed into a philosophical stage. And it is this strong philosophical basis that is one of the reasons why it is so hard to win Christians to Christianity today. I know from personal experience because I was a missionary in India for 5.5 years. Their main beliefs, they have a pantheistic view of God. There's one omnipresent divine being who pervades all nature. And the human soul is part of that spirit being. Then there are multitudes of lesser gods. There's also the caste system, 4 main castes and multiple lesser intermediary castes. And Hindus all know which caste to which they belong. And it's impossible in Indian society for a person of low caste to pass himself off as a person of a higher caste, because the Indians know the structure of their caste society so well they can just look at him and more or less pigeonhole him where he fits in their hierarchy of castes. They also believe in the doctrine of karma, K-A-R-M-A, which is the law of retribution, and is tied in with their doctrine of reincarnation. Because they believe in each person has a spirit soul inside them, which is part of the great Brahma, or spirit of the universe, or the pantheistic God that they revere, that soul is immortal and never dies. So when they die, their soul lives on and is born again in some other form of life. One of my missionary friends one time was on a bicycle traveling through a southern Indian city, and he saw a well-dressed Indian gentleman, quite well-to-do, living in a very big house, out in the garden with his roses, and had a little container in one hand and a little spoon in the other, and he was dipping it into the container and putting something on the ground at the foot of one of the rose plants. And my missionary friend stopped and said to him, "What are you doing, sir?" Well, when he came across and spoke to him and said, "Maybe you wouldn't understand. But you see, at the foot of that rose bush that I was looking at, there is an ant nest. And I have here a bowl of sugar. And I'm giving sugar to those ants, because some of those ants might be my ancestors." So you don't have to be born again as another human being. You can be born as an animal. That is why the Hindus, strict Hindus, and particularly the Jains, which I'll talk about in a little while, don't believe it's right to kill anything, not even insects, not even ants, not even fleas or any wasps or any insect that torments man, because in your next reincarnation you might be one yourself. This is the doctrine of karma and reincarnation, and it is followed by some other Indian religions as well. The next one I want to consider is known as Zoroastrianism, founded by a man called Zoroaster around about 660 BC. It is believed that the Persian kings mentioned in the Bible were Zoroastrians, and also the wise men of the East who came and visited Jesus at his birth, they believed to be members of this religious persuasion. Today, this religion has a different name, same religion, but it's now called Parsiism, the Parsis. And it is found almost exclusively in India. There's only about 100,000 of them in the world, figures I saw some years ago, and 80% of them live in Bombay, or Mumbai now, in India, and the other 20% scattered over in other cities of India. What are their main beliefs? Their theology is dualistic. That is, there is one good God called Angramanyu, and one good God called Ahura Mazda, and one evil God called Angramanyu. These two have limited each other all through the ages, and though regarded as equal in power, the good God will one day triumph somehow. There are other gods and bad spirits. Compare our belief in good and bad angels. Parallel there to the Christian's viewpoint. Earth and fire are regarded as sacred. So they have a problem when someone dies. They can't bury them in the earth because the earth is sacred. They can't cremate them because fire is sacred. So what do? They put the corpses in a tower high above the earth and leave it there for the vultures to come and devour. And I've been in Mumbai, and on the top of Malabar Hill, which is a high hill in one of the suburbs of Bombay, they have a large Parsi temple and Tower of Silence structure. And you can see there almost any day of the week, and you can see the vultures circling over that hilltop, because they know that there will be a body almost every day for them to feed on. Even in Pune, which used to be the headquarters of our SDA mission office, division office in India, not there now, it's been moved down into South India, but outside, over the fence from the compound the church owned for the headquarters, there was a tower of silence for the Parsis, for the people of Pune. That is their practice. Shintoism. This is one of the main religions of Japan. We have no known founder for this religion, but it dates from around about 660 BC. And their main belief involves male and female gods. And they used to believe that the emperor was descended from the gods. Therefore, he was worshipped as a god. The morals of the Japanese people is said to be better than the morals of the gods that they worship. As the gods that they worship committed adultery and killed each other and lived violent lives, because it is tolerant of other religions, Buddhism has been able to coexist with Shintoism in Japan. And many Japanese people follow Buddhist practices, though they call themselves Shintoists. There are very few definite theological beliefs. However, there have been some notable changes since World War II, because after the Second World War, the emperor declared to his people that he was not divine, and he renounced all claims to divinity. Now I want to move over to China, to a religion called Taoism, spelled Taoism, but pronounced as if it was halfway between a D and a T, Taoism. Founded by a man called Lao Tzu, around about 604 BC. one of the main religions of China. Lao Tzu was about 50 years old when Lao Tzu was about 50 years older than Confucius. And once Confucius called on him and discussed their beliefs together, they parted, not having reached agreement, but agreed to differ. The main beliefs of Taoism is a mystical religion that teaches its followers to follow the divine way of the universe, whatever that is. The Supreme Being is eternal, but mystical. One similarity to Christianity is the teaching to return good for evil. In later years, the founder has been regarded as divine and is worshipped by his followers. The perfect individual is one who is placid, self-contented, and indifferent to all people and all things. The religion stresses what they call wu hui, do nothing, non-striving, inactivity. And one of my lecturers years ago was a missionary, been a missionary in China, and he told a story in class one day about a man who was walking down the street carrying a bamboo pole with a load of food and things in front and back balanced, and as he walked along it was jogging up and down like this on the road, and a pot of mustard fell off the back basket that he was carrying. And as it hit the ground, it broke into pieces. The man never stopped. He just kept on going. And the missionary standing there said to him, "Yeah, your pot of mustard has fallen off the basket at the back." And the man stopped and looked at him and said, "I know. I heard it fall. I heard it break. It is spoiled. There's nothing I can do about it. Why should I stop and go back and just look at it?" And on the way he went. This typifies this wu-wei attitude to life. Don't be concerned about anything. All life, the religion over the years has degraded into polytheism, demonology, and witchcraft. Now come to Jainism, a religion founded in India by a man called Mahavira, 599 BC. He was the son of a Hindu Raja, and he tried to reform Hinduism. Most attempts to reform Hinduism ended up in branching off in forming a new religion, as we'll see in a little while. He tried to reform Hinduism. He was opposed to the doctrine of the domination of the Brahmin priests, the claimed authority of the Sanskrit Vedas, which are the sacred writings that the Hindus have, the cruelty of animal sacrifices, and the absolute monism of the Upanishads, another set of their Hindu writings. The attempt to reform Hinduism failed and a new religion began. What are their maiden beliefs? No object was to be worshipped. However, followers today worship Mahavira. At first, the religion denied a supreme being and did not believe in prayer. Like Hinduism, they believe in karma, the immortality of the soul, and reincarnation. All life is sacred, so nothing should be killed, not even insects. The body is looked upon as being vile, joined in a pure soul. So here we have a dichotomy, a duality. Therefore, the body should be denied and suppressed. It tried rather unsuccessfully to get rid of the caste system, but it didn't succeed. And women, listen women, in this religion, women have no real status. They are looked upon as condemned. So for any man to be reincarnated as a woman would be, for them, the Jains, a tragedy. Now I turn attention to Buddhism, founded by a man called Gautama Buddha, 560 BC. He too was the son of a wealthy prince, and he lived in luxury, sheltered from the real life, not knowing what the world was like outside the palace and its grounds. One day he went outside the palace to see the world, and he saw 4 things that changed his life. 1, a decrepit old man. 2, a loathsomely sick man. 3, a corpse. 4, a religious ascetic, unperturbed by any suffering. He was so disturbed by what he saw that he embarked on a mission to find out the reason why people suffered. He renounced his position, renounced his wife and small son, became a wanderer looking for answers. One day he was sitting under a bow tree, they call it, a large species of tree in India, and experienced what his followers called the Great Enlightenment. The main beliefs that he worked out are as follows. All living involves pain and suffering. Can't get away from it. 2, pain comes from indulging desire. 3, pain will cease when desire is suppressed and eliminated. In the meantime, until you can succeed in suppressing all desire, you should live by the 8 noble rules of life. These are right belief, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood or work, right endeavour, right thought, and right concentration. In addition, there were 5 prohibitions, namely, do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not tell lies, and do not drink intoxicating drink. You'd almost think he got some of those principles to live by from the 10 Commandments, wouldn't you? He rejected the caste system of Hinduism, but taught karma and reincarnation and nirvana as the goal of life. Note that Buddhism began as a philosophy, not as a religion. Originally, there was no mention of any god or gods. Man can achieve all this that is needed. But today, most Buddhists worship Buddha, their founder. Now, I used a word a few moments ago that perhaps I need to explain, and that is the word nirvana. Nirvana is a state of achievement known in both Hinduism and in Buddhism. You see, in the doctrine of reincarnation says that you will be born again in another life when you die, according to the way you lived in this life, your current life. If you were a good person, you can get to a higher state. If you're a bad person, you go to a lower state. Whether it's animal, bird, insect, fish, or whatever. All life is involved in this doctrine of karma and reincarnation. But if you can achieve to get up to be a Brahmin, priestly caste in Hinduism, you really achieve something. And then if you've been a really good priest, that caste, your goal is to achieve nirvana, where you cease to have independent existence. After all, your soul is a part of the spirit of the universe, this pantheistic concept. And your soul will be absorbed back into that soul of the universe, and you cease to have individual existence. Which makes it very hard for Christians to preach to Hindus and Buddhists that God is promising us eternal life as a reward for accepting Jesus as our Saviour. They say, eternal life, what is that? I have eternal life now and I'm trying to get rid of it. I want to get in nirvana, be absorbed back into God and cease to be an individual. So these are some of the problems that Christian missionaries have in some of the countries where these doctrines are believed and taught. Now the last one I want to look at this morning is Confucianism. Founded by Confucius about 551 BC. He was a Chinese man. He was a school teacher and a public servant. He founded more of a philosophy than a religion, but it is classed today as a religion because the founder is being worshipped by his followers. At first, he discouraged belief in a personal God, prayer, and worship of a supreme being. Today, Confucianism believes in a divine supervision of the world, while personified forms of nature are at times also worshipped. Confucius taught that human nature and society could be reformed through good government. We can compare Western humanism, which says that man has the power to develop to such a level that he can become perfect and have a perfect society. Humanism, of course, has taken some pretty heavy blows in the philosophical world since World War I and World War II, because people are deceived into thinking they can evolve until they become perfect, but World War II has shattered some of these beliefs. Confucius stressed the proper performance of social duties and set up standards of behavior by which to live. He believed that human nature was inherently good, which of course the Bible contradicts. Now in conclusion, what can we say in summary? I put it to you that God could foresee that all these changes were about to come. And he endeavored to get Israel to get in first with the gospel, announcing the coming of the Messiah in the first advent. The fact that people accepted these various religions that arose at this time and the philosophies that arose up in Greece at this time, that they were ready for something better than they had. What a shame it is that Israel failed. We believe that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been raised up by God in these last days to take the three angels' messages to the world and prepare a people for the second advent. What is our track record? Remember 1888? Soon after that general conference, Ellen White said that if the church had been faithful, we would have been in the kingdom before this. She wrote that around 1900 to 1905. You'll see Adventist Review and Herald, October 6, 1896, where you can read about it, see what she said. Someone has said that the SDA Church is to blame for the 2 world wars and all the other wars that have been fought since those wars ended, because we have not finished the work that God has given us to do. If God was urgent in getting Jonah to go to Nineveh to preach to them, I'm sure that he is urgent to get us today to finish the work that he has given us to do. May we all rise to the task and do what God wants us to do, the preaching of the everlasting gospel to every kindred, nation, tongue and people, so that Jesus can soon come. If you enjoyed this presentation, it is from my series, The Gospel in the Setting of End Time Events. See all of these videos in the playlist shown now. Should you have any questions, feel free to contact your local Seventh-day Adventist minister or church. Please see the description below the video for more information.